Catalog numbers at midnight, truth on the rostrum. My name is Ezra, and most days I turn desire into lot numbers. I'm a specialist at a mid-size auction house, the kind with marble floors that pretend to be older than the gossip they hear, and a sale room that makes even broke people sit up straighter. On paper, I appraise paintings, chase provenance, shepherd consignments through lighting and language until they look inevitable. In practice, I interpret appetite for a living. I carry a jeweler's loupe in my pocket because I like the feeling of small, exact truths. I carry a notebook that knows the difference between an estimate and a promise. I carry a phone I am bad at ignoring. I live with Daniel. He's an EMT who has seen too many midnights claim their pound and still chooses daylight shifts when they let him. He smells like antiseptic and road grit in the first 10 minutes after a thunderstorm, and his hands remember anatomy the way my hands remember frames. We have a rule we wrote after a winter that taught us what not talking costs: speak before noon. We don't always keep it. We keep trying. The Tuesday when the Picasso behaved and I didn't, I was on the viewing floor adjusting labels for the evening sale. The room was full of people who'd come to measure themselves against paint, whisperers with money, students rehearsing nonchalance, dealers pretending their blood pressure is negotiable. The Cezanne's lot tag had tilted, and I was kneeling to fix it when the joint email Daniel and I use for deliveries blinked across my lock screen. Thank you for your stay, Vesper Hotel. Time 12/11/3/02. Points 200 added. The word noon has a way of arriving even when you don't give it a chance. I swallowed a sentence I wasn't proud of and pretended the walls were interested in shame. I didn't call. Our household rule for things not yet disasters is 2 loops around the block before nomming them. My block is the long rectangle of corridor that connects the viewing rooms to the back stairs, a strip of neutral carpet that carries a million shoes and no judgment. I walked it twice. The HVAC sighed an old song the building likes when it wants to pretend it's not complicit. The only sentence it hummed all the way through was the one machines prefer: "You already know." We met the man who would ruin my posture 2 days after that text, because the universe likes to time these things for narrative coherence. His name, at least the one he used in the book, was Roman Lee. He was the kind of consigner who slows a room down when he walks in because every gesture looks like a story you'll want to tell later. He had brought us a portrait by a painter who was more myth than archive, a half-turned face with a mouth that taught a generation of dealers the phrase, "market fresh." The painting's provenance was fine. Roman was. He told it anyway. He treated the work like it had forgiven him, and he was trying to live up to the grace. "Stand there," he said to me during the condition report, almost polite, as if light were a game we could win together. "To your left. You'll see how her mouth becomes the idea of a mouth. That's the problem with the truth. It thinks it has permission to finish." "I'm familiar with the problem," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. Roman had a way of listening that felt like hands. He stood closer than he needed to and further than would be obvious on camera. He asked about the sale, about lot order and bidders I could not discuss, and then asked about the thing people rarely ask me: how did I come to enjoy making strangers nervous? I told him it was a skill I learned by accident and kept because it paid my rent. He smiled with the slight crookedness of a person who knows how cameras solve faces. When he left, he touched my forearm with 2 fingers in a way that didn't quite count as a touch and looked like a promise. Daniel texted that night from the back of an ambulance with a photo of his boots on the diamond plate step and a caption that read, "We fought for someone and maybe won." I wrote back. I rewrote a label until the wall believed me. He sent a blue heart and a complaint about hospital coffee. We are men who bring each other what we can. Roman came back the following afternoon because consigners like him do. They orbit their objects until separation anxiety becomes policy. He wore conversation like cologne. He stepped into my personal space in a way that made my ribs pay attention and said, "You look like a man who knows where edge lies." "Edges are a hobby," I said. "Let's make it a profession," he answered, cheerful, inevitable. "Drinks tonight, Vesper Bar. If it helps your calendar, call it due diligence." I am a disciplined person with a body that negotiates. I went. The Vesper Bar is the sort of dark that steals other rooms' secrets and ages them in oak. He found me half buried in an armchair and made it look like I belonged there. He bought the first drink and let the second arrive on its own. He asked about the line between thrill and risk, and I said in my voice for non-bidders, "It depends on the estimate." He laughed into my mouth like it had earned a compliment and put his hand on my hip in a way that made the chair less relevant. Hotel rooms are always the same room. The carpet changes pattern. The night has better taste some nights. The sheets pretend to be about thread count. Roman pressed me against the wall and kissed me like someone who knows the physics of confession. He kissed the inside of my wrist first as if taking my pulse counted as permission. He asked, "Here?" without grammar, and I said yes, with my hands in his hair. He was generous in a way that can only be learned and selfish in the way that only good students are. The room smelled like citrus and housekeeping's last attempt at erasing the previous afternoon. For a handful of minutes, I was a version of myself that makes more sense without mirrors. After, he lay there with his hands behind his head like an apology that didn't quite pan out and said, "You're going to forgive him," meaning Daniel, meaning me. "I'm going to find a version of me I like," I said, and it sounded like a quote from a movie that knows better than to win awards. The sale catalog closed to the printer, and the Vesper Bar remembered our names. Roman had a wife on paper and a calendar full of grace notes. I had a man who believes sirens mean an opportunity to be decent, and a rule we were both challenging on purpose. I kept thinking I could hold all of it without spilling. I have handled $30 million of risk with steadier hands. 2 days before the sale, the gossip vertical everyone pretends not to read published a photo of Roman outside our viewing room with someone they called a senior specialist. The angle was clever. No faces, just the curve of my shoulder, the part of his mouth cameras like, my hand on the door. The headline said, "Object Lessons, because irony is on retainer." The comment section was an audit I hadn't authorized. My director sent me a link to the piece and the note, "We're taking care of it." Daniel sent me the same link and the note, "Do you want to talk before or after my shift?" I walked my corridor loop and the HVAC sang, "You already know," and then I did the thing I promised myself I would do before we bought furniture together. I told the truth at noon. He met me on the fire stairs behind our kitchen because we don't like being dramatic on furniture. He stood with his foot on the next step as if he kept a head start for emergencies. I told him I had been unfaithful. I didn't say entanglement. I said the word he deserved. He inhaled and exhaled like a discipline, then put his hand on my shoulder in a way that reminded me he can hold human weight for long stretches without complaint. "Who?" he asked, because he is a man who catalogs what he is asked to carry. I told him. He nodded like a building checking its bearings. "Is it over?" he asked, and the question didn't ask for theater. "It can be," I said, because sometimes the only truth that matters is the next attempt. "Then make it," he said. He added, "I love you," and aimed it not at the version of me who makes a mess but at the one trying to sweep. It hurt in a way that felt like blood being smart. I texted Roman in language a lawyer would respect. "We're done." He wrote back 3 sentences that sounded like velvet and threat. I blocked him and the part of my brain that collects stories whimpered and then shut up. The sale arrived in a rush the way storms do. The room stood when the auctioneer took the rostrum, then sat, then leaned forward like it wanted to confess. The first lots went like salvage operations and careful reunions. A bidder in Hong Kong made the telephone clerk blush. A dealer pretended to be the client and lost convincingly. When Roman's portrait came up, the room behaved exactly how it should when appetite meets occasion. The painter's mouth became the idea of a mouth. Hands rose. The bidding climbed. The number turned obscene, and then interesting, and then history. We hammered at a figure that would put a child through the kind of school that thinks it invented art. The room exhaled and applauded like forgiveness. The portrait stared at me without blinking, and I looked away first. I thought that would be the end of it. It was. After the sale, the consignor's dinner happened in a private room where chairs know the difference between rich and regrettable. I went because I always go. Roman didn't show because men like that understand entrances better than exits. His wife did. She wore complicity like a dress and survival like perfume. She thanked us for the estimate we had publicly outperformed. She looked at me like a person who reads books knows where footnotes hide. Then she said, lightly enough to be dismissed by the untrained, "Next time, no hallways," and left 3/4 of her champagne untouched. I went home and told Daniel about the dinner and about the portrait and about the way money makes you feel like a room owes you. Then I told him about the wife and the hallway, and he listened with his whole face. "You can stay," he said, "or you can leave, but you don't get to be the person in the photograph and call that a life." We didn't kiss for a long time, and then we did. I put my mouth against his wrist, where the pulse keeps its calendar, and he said my name the way you say a diagnosis you intend to survive. Roman tried to reach me once more with an email that pinged the old account we'd used for files too large to be professional. He wrote "You're good" in low light, and attached a photo from the Vesper bar that could have been anyone. I didn't answer. I forwarded it to an address that belongs to no one now and deleted my copy, because sometimes you have to produce your own evidence of being finished. We made our rule bigger. This is the part people want to know when they listen to stories like ours, what happens after the heat forgets itself. We kept the noon policy and added a human one. If you write a sentence you're scared to read out loud, bring it home before midnight. If you take a body you intend to keep, make sure it already has a bed here. If you pick a room over a person, rearrange the furniture until the person wins. We didn't laminate it. We remembered it. A week later, after the checks cleared and the press had migrated to scandals with better lighting, I walked past the Vesper because memory is a creature that likes to check if you still taste the same. I did not go in. I went home and found Daniel sleeping with one hand under the pillow like a man rehearsing for decisions. I lay beside him without touching, and the space between us felt like honesty that had earned its keep. At 8 the next morning he made coffee and kissed the side of my mouth in the way that says we will not perform forgiveness. We will practice it. If you need the intrigue dressed in better fabrics. Yes, there was a hotel and a stairwell and a man who times his silences. If you need the erotics to justify their entrance, they happened. They were beautiful. They are not the point. The point is that a portrait sold, a building remained vertical, a siren brought someone back for a while, and two men decided to keep a rule written in pen. The city outside is a sale room that never closes. It keeps lining its switches without complaint. For a few hours at a time, we are good at being alive inside it. That is not a lot. It is enough.